welcome back. This is Sierra, and on my channel today, you guys already know by the title that today we're going to be talking about another one of many China adoption series topics. Before I do that, I want to take a quick detour to talk about my channel for a second, because I know that this adoption series has brought a lot of new subscribers and new people who aren't really used to the kind of content that I usually create. So anyways, if you guys are new around here, or if you guys have been gone for a while, every week on our channel, my son and I try to make a new video about our life in Japan, Lush being vegan, and trying to live a little bit more sustainably. And because this is an adoption series video, you guys, yes, can safely assume that the son that we have is adopted. He was adopted from China this past fall. I know it was already in my disclaimer, but I do want to say again, for the second time, that our family does not support or work for any specific adoption agencies. The videos that we're making are just based on our experience and the information that we were able to find online, and the information that we had to buy by ourselves. So in this video, now that you guys have seen why we adopted and what the process is like and what the home study process is like, which the home study kind of tends to scare people off, now you guys are probably wondering what the other adoption requirements are. I know we should have posted this video differently, but we filmed this out of order, so sorry, just like a movie. Anyway, today's video we're going to be talking about the requirements to adopt from China. Now, quick backtrack to the history of adoption in China. I know a lot of countries have international adoption programs, but the one in China is probably one of the oldest in the world. Because of that, China has a lot of very strict rules, and the process is very, very straightforward, which is one of the reasons that it's incredibly popular. Anyway, let's get started on the requirements for the adoption program. I have a lot of notes in my bullet journal, so if you guys see me looking down basically constantly, that's what I'm looking at. I'm sorry I wasn't able to memorize all this stuff. It's like 3 full pages. So anyways, let's get into the requirements to adopt from China. So most of these things are specifically related to the parents. And all of these things, again, because I don't represent an agency, take these things that I say with a grain of salt, only because our adoption did take place 4 months ago, and we started our process a year and a half ago, so things may or may not have changed since then. But I used 3 different adoption agencies' websites to compile my list, and all 3 of them match exactly. No, I'm not going to link my sources in the description, only because of the fact that I don't have any direct connections with these agencies. Also, later in a couple of videos, I may or may not say some negative things about the agencies that we use, and I'm not going to mention their name then, so I don't want to mention their names now, if that makes sense. So first question is, who can adopt from China? Well, in order to adopt from China, you have to be at least 30 years old. So spoiler alert, I'm not 21. I got a comment the other day that said I looked like I was 21. Thank you, by the way. I'll take it. But no, I'm over 30, because obviously the requirement is you have to be over 30 to adopt from China. Now, there is a little bit of a loophole with that. With some agencies, you can be 29 and a half at the time of application, only because of the fact that the whole process takes a minimum, they say, of 6 months. According to our agency, they've never seen anyone take less than 8.5 months, but you do have to be 30 at the time that you take custody. Moving on, other thing you need to know about age is that you do have to be no more than 50 years old than the child that you are adopting. So let's say I'm going to adopt a 7-year-old. So if I'm older than 57, I wouldn't be able to adopt that child, because there would be a more than 50-year age gap between us. All right, next category we're going to talk about is marriage. So if you want to adopt as a couple from China, you do have to be a heterosexual couple. I know in a different video I have talked a little bit about my views on the gay community, but that's not what we're getting into here, so don't come for me. But according to the rules for China, you have to be a heterosexual couple, meaning male and female, biologically, to adopt from China. That's just what it says. Don't come for me. I'm sorry. And you have to be married, and you have to be married for a minimum of 2 years. If you are married, there's a limit on how many past divorces you can have. If you've had 1 divorce, then, I mean, that's fine. Then your newest marriage, the marriage with the person you're adopting with, has to be at least 2 years old. And if you had 2 divorces, then you have to be married for 5 years before you can adopt from China. I know this seems kind of crazy and harsh, because I know a lot of time older couples get married. It's maybe their second marriage because their spouse has passed away, or for whatever reason. It's still 2 years, because they want to make sure the marriage is going to stick for the children. So I get that. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but I understand where they're coming from. Okay, moving on. Now, you do not necessarily have to be married to adopt from China. However, if you're going to adopt as a single person from China, you do have to be a heterosexual female. I know, please don't come for me. Those are just the rules, okay? If you ask me, anyone who wants to adopt from China should be able to adopt from China. That's just the rules that China put up. So take it up with them, please. Now, the next part is the part that we personally were very nervous about, and this part is when it comes to your finances. Now, in order to adopt from China, if you are married, you have to have what's called a net worth of $80,000. So I know that sounds like a lot, and when we were going through and starting our paperwork, the reason we didn't originally start with the China adoption program is because we didn't think that we had that. But talk to your agency. Believe it or not, there is a lot of different things that you may or may not be able to count within your $80,000 net worth. So that being said, we were able to count things like our salaries, which obviously that would be a big chunk of your net worth right there. We were also able to count properties that we own that were already paid off. We were able to count jewelry, and we were also even able to count a certain amount of Mr.'s retirement fund. So all that together brought us up to that net worth. Do we actually have that money just hanging out in a bank account somewhere? No. But the idea is it's net worth. It's meaning they want to see that you have the assets where you had to pull those things, that you would have that money there to take care of your family, your child, because sometimes children from China have medical needs that they don't know about until you bring them home, or that may or may not have been caught in their medical exams in China. So that's something to think about. Okay, and then as a single heterosexual female, if you want to adopt from China, you have to have a net worth of $100,000. And then one more thing you have to do, this has to go with your actual income every year. You have to be able to provide evidence that you have $10,000 coming in every year per family member. So what that means for our family is that we have Mr., myself, and our son who now lives with us. And so before we were able to adopt from China, we had to show evidence that we brought in at least $30,000 per year. Now that being said, I'm sure there is a little bit of wiggle room on all three of these tiers, but that's just something to be aware of so that when things come up, you can talk about it and you can figure out with your agency whether or not the China adoption process is still going to be something that's viable for you. Okay, so the next part we're going to talk about is health. Now, we did talk about this a little bit in our process video and also our home study video. We're going to talk about it again because there are a lot of requirements for your health in order to adopt from China, and I understand the reason behind all of the requirements, but it is the strictest program that I've ever seen. The list is pretty long, so I'm gonna have to just read straight from the list and I'll explain as much as I can. But again, if you're not sure, ask your agency, ask your healthcare provider. They are ultimately going to be the people who make these decisions about whether or not you can adopt from China. So this is just what I was able to find on the 3 sites that I used. So the first thing that could disqualify you from adopting from China is whether or not you have any type of intellectual or mental disability. China does not give a definitive list of exactly what would be considered an intellectual or mental disability, but that's something to note. Okay, second thing that is actually related to the first one is that China is very, very strict about your mental health past and your mental health present. Now obviously because we adopted from China, then you know that Mr. and I don't have any of these things, but I don't know if you guys ever noticed the scar on Mr.'s head, but he had a really intense surgery when he was a child, and when I was 5 years old, my father passed away, and because we were children of trauma, we did have to have a psych evaluation. Clearly we passed it, but anything that seems a little bit off or irregular, your home study agency will probably order a psych evaluation just to cover your bases. If this happens to you, don't think that there's something wrong with you. At first I thought maybe they thought that I was crazy. No, they're just covering you and they're covering themselves so that your home study doesn't get kicked back or your dossier doesn't get kicked back, because the last thing you want to do is spend all that money and then be told, no, sorry. So anyway, okay, so some of the things on the list is if you have any of these things, you will probably not be able to adopt from China. There is a bit of wiggle room. I have read on all 3 of the websites that if you work with a healthcare provider or a mental health provider and whatever it is that you have is well managed through medications or therapy or whatever, and it does not impact your cognitive functioning and your daily life, then you may or may not still be able to adopt from China. So the things on that list that may or may not disqualify you from adopting from China include but not limited to mania, schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, which I know a lot of people say that they have anxiety, but a lot of you guys do need to realize that anxiety is actually like a spectrum of a mental illness. Of course, people have like regular anxiety. We're like, oh, I'm so nervous, I'm feeling anxiety. For China, that's not really the same thing as having the anxiety that is crippling. So if you have crippling anxiety, then that's something that you may or may not be rejected for. Also, if you have OCD of any type, they might just reject you right away, or they may order a psych evaluation to make sure that you're okay. And phobias, which I don't think they're talking about things like arachnophobia, but if you have something like agoraphobia, perhaps that could get you disqualified, because if you don't leave your house, how can you realistically take care of a child, if that makes sense? Again, talk to your mental health provider if you have any of those things, because they may or may not be able to write you a letter that says that these things do not interact with your daily life. I don't want to discourage you if you do struggle with any of these things. I just want to share and let you guys know just in case. So the rest of the parts in the health category are going to have to do with your body. So So the first thing we're talking about is your eyes. If you are blind or if you have any partial blindness, that could disqualify you from the China adoption program. Next is if you have any severe facial deformity. So if you have something like a port wine stain, that's probably not going to be a big deal, but I think that they're really talking about deformities is if you have like maybe you were burned really badly and like maybe one side of your face looks a lot different than the other one. Basically, they're just looking for people that have like standard looking faces, if that makes sense. Is that even a thing? I think you guys know what I mean. Please don't come for me. The next one, this is really interesting to me, is if you want to adopt from China, you cannot have any hearing loss or loss of hearing function. So basically, if you are deaf or hard of hearing, it's highly likely that you will be disqualified from the China program unless the child that you are adopting is either deaf or hard of hearing. You know, I guess the idea is, you'll see with a couple of the other things later down the list, is that if you have the disability and you know how to manage it and yours is managed well, then if you adopt a child with the same thing, then you'll know how to take care of it, if that makes sense. The next thing that could disqualify you from adopting from China is if you have any limb differences or severe problems with mobility. So for example, if you're in a wheelchair, or if you were born like without like your hand or something, or if you were injured maybe in battle and you're missing a part of your leg or whatever it is, if for some reason you have decreased mobility, you won't be able to adopt from China. Now that being said, I have heard of some families where one of the spouses has a disability and the other one is healthy. I say quotes because there's no such thing as a real healthy person, or a person without that disability, they were still able to adopt from China. I know, I think one or maybe two families even, that one of the parents had a limb difference and they were still able to adopt from China. Okay, moving on. The next thing to disqualify you from adopting from China is if you have any diseases that require long-term treatment, because a lot of these diseases or disorders can get worse over time and they don't want to bring a child into your family and then have something happen to you, which totally makes sense. So these things can be included things like HIV, lupus, necrosis, epilepsy, and MS. And like I've said for the millionth time, if you have one of these and your partner doesn't, then it's possible that you'll still be able to adopt from China. But if you were a single woman trying to adopt from China, you wouldn't be able to adopt from China with these things, if that makes sense. Moving on to cancer. Now, I know that it does vary case by case, but if you have had any form of cancer, it is either you can't adopt from China at all, or it's also possible that if you've been cancer-free for between 3 and 5 years, that you will be able to adopt from China. Again, it is case by case and based on what your doctor has to say in your medical report and whether or not they think that your cancer will be able to come back or not. Next thing that could disqualify you from adopting from China is if you have had a transplant of any organ within the past 10 years. If you have been healthy for 10 years and your spouse has not had a transplant, then you still may be able to adopt from China. Well, according to this, you will still be able to adopt from China. But if you were a single person who has had a transplant within 10 years, it's possible they could disqualify you. So something to think about. And another thing that could disqualify you from adopting from China is either short stature or dwarfism. Now there is a loophole to this. Again, if you are someone with dwarfism and you are adopting someone who also has dwarfism, then that is, I guess, on the yes list. Otherwise, if you are someone who has dwarfism and the child you're trying to adopt does not, then you may not be able to adopt that child. And the last and final thing on the list, although I'm sure really China could reject you for any reason when they see your medical report, is about BMI. And I know that BMI is kind of controversial because I know some people can be like have a really high BMI but be super healthy, but according to China you have to have a BMI of less than 40. And I calculated it for my own height and weight just because I was curious about like how much I would have to weigh to be over that. And so for my height, I'm 5'5", and so someone who's my height would have to weigh over 240 pounds in order to be disqualified from China. All right, let's move on. We are now finished with all of the health stuff and the financial requirements. Now we're just going to get on to your character. So as I already said, in the home study process, you do have a lot of interviews and background checks, and basically you have to be like a decent human being with decent morals to adopt from China is what it really boils down to. So according to the 3 sources and the websites that I used, the few things that could disqualify you from the China program is if you have a history of drug use. Also, you have to have no history of alcohol abuse within the last 10 years and no history of domestic violence, sexual abuse, or child abuse. So all of those things, obviously, they wouldn't want those things to be in your past, so that makes total sense. And then finally, you cannot have any criminal history, any current warrants, and or any probation sentences. Basically, if you're an alright person and you haven't broken any rules, then you're probably cool to adopt from China. Okay guys, we're getting to the end. The last and final category for the China adoption process is there are some requirements and regulations on family size, and there's actually only one rule for each family type. If you're adopting as a couple, then you can have no more than 5 children in your home, and if you're adopting as a single person, you can have no more than 2 children already in your home. Basically what they're saying is if you adopt from China, the last child you can bring into your home as a couple is your 6th child, and if you are a single person, then the last child you can bring home would be your 3rd child from China. So yeah, that's it. I thought I had more to say in this video, but I just realized that the second half of the page is actually my notes for the next video I'm going to film later today or tomorrow. So at this point in the video, either you liked the video and you watched it all the way to the end, so you should definitely make sure that you like and subscribe. And if you didn't make it this far in the video, then you're not going to see this disclaimer. Anyway, if you guys do want to come back to my video for later reference, I will make sure to put timestamps of all of the categories in the description so you guys come back and check that out. Other than that, that's all I have to say. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!